as an individual, I have, sort of minimized for much of my career the emotional piece, right? I've led arguably too much with logic, which is why it's actually an interesting experience for me having gone through this transition I have, um, to be able to check in with my emotional side and be able to be sort of reconnected with that and understand, okay, if I'm feeling this, there's a reason for it. Let me check in. So that was something that for whatever reason I had sort of suppressed in me for many, many years. And I don't know exactly why. I'm sure a shrink could help me figure that out. But I also understand now, and arguably I understood it in the moment too, but didn't do anything about it, that I had an unhealthy relationship with work because of how young I was when I came into that company, because of how much it predated in my life. It was actually an unhealthy amount wrapped up in my self identity where I couldn't separate the two. And it became sort of all consuming.
Well, welcome, Jared Antin.
Thank you, Jessica. Happy to be here with you today.
Yeah. So Jared, what first sparked your interest in the real estate industry? What drew you to it initially?
I would say it's both by accident and by design.
Okay.
Growing up, I always had a degree in architecture. I loved as a middle schooler designing these awesome floor plans. One of which I thought I would actually build today, or as my home. That hasn't happened, at least not yet. But then, as I got older, I realized that a degree in architecture may be a little bit more limiting, and a business degree would be one that would provide me with some more options. So I studied real estate finance at James Madison University, minored in economics. This is, 2008, so real estate at that time was a dirty word. But I had gotten my real estate license as well shortly after I turned 18. And to me, I got into it as a way to network. Again, it was 2008, 2009. I needed a summer internship in New York City, where I was from. And I got into a brokerage working with two agents there. And I learned the business. I figured that I was good at it, and I sort of just fell into it by happenstance.
So you got your real estate license when you were 18?
Yeah, the
That's pretty
young ripe
ambitious.
age of 18.
Wow, that's ambitious. I have my real estate license too, and it takes quite an undertaking. It's a pretty intense process, learning all the different laws and passing the test. So you were pretty ambitious at 18 years old.
Yeah, some would say that they need to make the process a little bit harder, that we need to raise some of the barriers to entry, but that's a conversation for another day.
Okay. All right. No, fair. You've been active in the industry, so I'll take your word for it.
Yes.
Okay, very cool. So you mentioned feeling an inkling or gut instinct to make a career change in your job most recently. So how did you ultimately decide to listen to that?
Yeah, it wasn't easy. So to back up a step, so while I was still in college, I had interned at my previous company, and I had come in when it was a very young company and small, and I stayed on there, right after graduation and for 15 more years. So I grew up there, so to speak, and I grew up alongside the company, and for all intents and purposes, I was running that firm for the last 2.5 years before my departure. But as we did discuss, I had this gut feeling, which I had ignored for a year and a half, that it was time for me to make a move or to move on. And, it was coming from a few places. One, that I had sort of outgrew the surroundings or outgrew the firm, or the desire to want to try something different, or also the fear of, well, I've been here for 15 years, like, what happens if I never leave, kind of thing. And you sort of get that at these different instances in your career. I had at the 5 year mark where I was like, well, if you're going to make the switch, 5 years is a good time. I didn't. Then you get to 10, you're like, well, if you don't make a switch now, you're sort of set here. And then, 15 was a huge, milestone. And I didn't necessarily make the decision by choice. There was a few events that made remaining there no longer in my best interest, or tenable, one may put it. So it's interesting to see how, again, I live by everything happens for a reason. That's really my North Star that I pin everything to. So when something happens that may seem out of the blue or unfortunate, I try to take a step back before I get wrapped up into it and really say, okay, well, let's find the understanding here. Let's look for that North Star. Let's understand why this may have happened. And at the end of the day, I couldn't be happier with the switch. It really enabled me to accomplish a lot of what I was looking for, and create a much better sort of situation or foundation. But going through it, it can be incredibly, tough. Um, but I think it drives home the fact that when your gut is talking to you, be intentional about taking a step back, be intentional about checking in with yourself and how you're feeling. Because if there is some sort of thing going on into your gut, it's there for a reason. You have to be able to trust it and listen to it and understand how to dissect what it's trying to tell you.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And so you said a lot there, and I'd like to dissect that a bit. You mentioned that you felt a gut feeling, you ignored it for about a year. And it sounded like when you thought about making a move, you were having certain doubts and fears come in. Was that correct?
Yeah, I think it's always scary to make a
Yeah.
transition. I tend to be someone that, stays in relationships for a long period of time. I'm a loyal individual. My wife and I met day one freshman year of college, where we both went to school at James Madison.
Hmm.
We've been together now half of our lives, between dating and marriage and everything. So, you know, my nature is not to hop around to switch jobs. Being as young as I am and to have worked at one place for as much of my career is not normal, so to speak, in our day and age. So it was certainly scary in trying to say, okay, how do I make that leap? How do I come out and say, to my boss and the company that we've been working together for so long and had a great relationship, that it's time for me to make a move, or what is that going to do to that company that I'm leaving behind and those people that I've cared so much and worked so hard, alongside. So there's a moment in this where you have to sort of figure out where does selfishness come in or doesn't come in, right? Are you being selfish by trying to put yourself first and making a move? Are you being, is it appropriate to be selfish in that case or not? And, these were some of the feelings that, I was wrestling with during that transition time.
Hmm. And so when we are in our comfort zone, which is at your last
Yeah,
firm, you were in your comfort zone, you'd been there for 15 years, you're a loyal person, you don't tend to hop around, which is admirable. A lot of clients come to us and they want to see people who've stayed at an organization at least 3 years.
right.
And there's value getting some other experience too, which I'm sure you're finding. But when we start to challenge staying in our comfort zone, fears and doubts are going to come in to keep us in our status quo.
Correct.
So that's essentially what I'm hearing you talk about. So when you did ultimately decide to make a move, how was that received by all the people that you were feeling like might be upset or you were breaking that loyalty to? How was that response and that experience?
A lot better than I feared. And I think that's the headline is I think everyone in the orbit understood. Some of them were like, oh, it's about time, right? Or like, I never thought she'd leave. So a lot of it was celebrated in that way. And even, the owner and my former boss wants nothing but the best for me, personally. And there was a mutual level of respect and understanding at the end of the day that was really important to me. And my network has all received it and shared, incredible positivity, which again reaffirmed that it was the right choice and the right decision, as hard as it may have been to go through. As soon as the decision was made and it was starting to be communicated, there was nothing but positivity and confidence and excitement then for that next chapter as we turn that page.
Hmm. And I love that you're mentioning that because a lot of the times when we hear those fears and those doubts that want us to stay in our comfort zone and prevent us from growing into a better version of ourselves, the fears are lies. And
Yes.
so that's essentially, you said it was much better received and people were celebrating like, wow, about time. So that's great that you did make that decision.
Important to remember that negative fears are often more powerful than positive fears, right? It's the
Mm,
same concept in, the fear of loss is significantly greater than the fear of gain, right? So you'd have to win a lot more than you would lose to be able to balance out sort of that cost piece. So it's hard, in human nature to be able to overpower sometimes those negative thoughts. And you're correct. The negative thoughts can hold you back or keep you in the comfort zone. So being able to go out and do these things that are slightly outside that may feel a little bit uncomfortable, as long as you still have your grounding and you're not going too far out on a limb, it's okay to tiptoe out there. It's okay. And then you're able to get that positive feedback and positive reinforcement that, oh, it's not so bad out here. Oh, let me go a little bit further. So you're not running without, a parachute, so to speak. You're not jumping without being prepared, but it's okay to be able to tiptoe out and be able to explore outside, because that's the only way that you're going to grow. That's the only way that you start getting excited again. And it gives you that important perspective that allows you to come back and say, okay, that was either good or not good, right? I'm going to do it again or not do it again. And that's the important piece is, if you stay boxed in where you feel comfortable, it's mundane, it's monotony, right? It doesn't allow you to continue to push or to strive further.
So you talked about how when you were evaluating if you wanted to leave or not, that you were thinking about being selfish and if there was an element of that. And so it's really interesting because selfishness gets a certain there's like a taboo, like a negative connotation towards it. But if we are not feeding our ultimate, like our longings and discontent and growing, and if we're staying somewhere that we feel like it's not serving ourselves, then we're not helping other people either.
Right.
Because if we're staying in a place that we're not happy, then we're actually not giving our best selves to the organization.
Yeah, and actually, I wasn't showing up in the person that I like to be, and I wasn't showing up in the best version of myself then in that environment, because, I was overtasked, overworked, under-resourced, and it's hard for anyone to be able to show up their best in that way. And I was also dealing with a ton of, again, that internal conflict, and some, personal strife and confrontation with myself going through that, and having this love, hate sort of relationship with what I was doing every day. And, when you look at the mix of things, there's things that you can do, and then there's things that you can do that give you energy, or things that you can do that drain you. And my mix of things that I was doing was straying off of what I got into this business to do, and was the incorrect composition between, energizing and draining sort of tasks, which again weighs on you.
Mhm.
And so that's been part of the refreshing piece of this change, is being able to come into an organization that has enabled me in this new role to focus more on the energizing tasks and not have to worry as much or even be responsible for a lot of those tasks that drain you. And that has allowed me to show up in what my sort of true self is and be able to put forth, um, a better experience for those around me.
Hmm. And that's a key way to find out, to really tap into, is this where I should be? Or is this somewhere that maybe I've outgrown? Is that
Right.
energy level? Am I feeling energized most of the day, right? We might not love every single aspect of our job, but that energy is such key to tap into to help us navigate our experience and make sure that we're really going towards things that light us up and make us excited, because we deserve that, and so does everybody else around us. How did you find your role that you stepped into recently?
It's actually a funny question, because I'm sitting here in this podcast studio, doing this where my new firm Brown Harris Stevens has, and the reason why it's funny is, a friend of mine who works at Brown Harris Stevens, a guy named Vince Rocco, has a podcast, and for many years I've been on his podcast, and actually walking in to this office and being a guest on his podcast and sitting in this very studio, and in the back of my mind, every time I'd walk to the door, it's like, I can work there. I could work there, right? And I was in the studio maybe a dozen times, over the years on different podcast episodes with him. So I had developed, some exposure to people here, and some people had known me, seen, some of the content I've put out as part of that. So to some extent, I was a known entity, so to speak. And then I think timing, as much of anything else, a mentor of mine over the years had connected me with someone very senior here to really kickstart the conversation, And it was occurring at a time where there was a need for someone of my skill set and caliber here. And it was really, again, in that sort of stars aligned sort of piece. So there was a little bit of this that I had laid the groundwork for myself over the previous years to do this. And I don't know that that was done consciously or how much of it was done subconsciously, but there was definitely pieces of myself at the prior piece of trying to figure out, okay, how do I create different breadcrumbs or different seeds to create other opportunities or optionality if that day ever sort of came? And, one of those came home to roost, so to speak.
Great. So,
Yeah.
what is your role at the new organization?
So the technical title is executive director. What does it really mean? It means a couple things. So first and foremost, in the real estate space, I'm one of the executives here helping to support our agents in the flagship office to make sure that they could, do their best, that they have everything they need to be able to serve their buyers, sellers, renter, landlords as well as they can, and that we train and develop them. When we look at agent management, I look at it through the lens of three things. There's deal triage, help me, I need help on 123 Main Street. There's proactive coaching and development, which is making sure that they're honed on all of the right skills and training and know how to hone their craft. And then the third is higher level sort of business development and coaching. What is their why? What's their motivation? What's their longer term vision? And what are the steps that they need to be able to grow their business or their team? So that's about half my day is agent coaching, development, and mentoring. And the other half is really leading strategy, business development, and other initiatives and partnering with our CEO, CMO, and CTO and other leadership team in helping to build on the 150 plus year legacy that Brown Harris Stevens has in multiple markets and be able to make sure that we can stay relevant, attract the next generation of agents. We have an incredibly hands on culture and collaboration and tools and training and everything. So we're really blending this sort of Goldilocks balance between what came out of a research study from two friends of mine, basically saying that people want the best of both worlds. They want to have a firm that's big enough to support them, but small enough to know them, and really working to be able to craft down that sort of tightrope and being able to make that a reality.
And speaking of 150 years, you said the
Yeah.
organization's been around. So, real estate has been around for a long time. And
Yeah.
I understand you've challenged the process a bit and you're training your agents to really engage prospective clients and clients in a new way. And I'd love to hear more about that if you don't mind.
Yeah, so I think there's a couple different headlines here, and there's part of a real estate incubator that I'm in that has been championing this sort of slogan amongst us that says, "I love boring things," right? And I think that this is an important thing today is that boring is going to win, right? I just put something out on social media today that says you'll succeed today because you were good at doing the boring things. There's been so much in the last 10, 15 years about new technology, AI, all this stuff that's going to get you rich quick or change the world or do all this. And to some extent, maybe some of that will. And some people did get very, very rich and wealthy on doing that. But at the end of the day, the core things are not going away. And the core things are those that are boring, that is going to be where you get repeatable long term success. Showing up, being empathetic, being smart, being on time, being responsive. These are the things that if you develop a competency in doing it, you will be sought out no matter what career, what profession you do. It's like building those raving fans, right? If you're able to put out an incredible experience, and those things aren't sexy, they're not necessarily exciting. They can be monotonous, but if you're really good at doing them, people take notice. So first and foremost is trying to go back to the roots and say, okay, how do we do the foundation really well? How do you do those core competencies well? And then it's flipping the narrative. Real estate agents have, to some extent, gotten lazy. That's a gross generalization, but it's arguably true. And we have a bad reputation in the market, slightly better than used car salesmen. But we have that because we've let us have that. As I mentioned earlier in the episode, we don't have a lot of barriers to entry to get in here. You have the opportunity to make a lot of money, and we have reality TV shows that have glorified and glamorized what it's like to be a real estate agent. Hate to break it to you, those shows are not real. So again, you're gonna see success not by doing some crazy stunts in front of a mega mansion. You're gonna seek success by meeting the right people, by building relationships, and by doing the boring things. So one of the things that I'm trying to shift right now is because agents have gotten so conditioned to dealing with lead generation mechanisms, whether that's Zillow or StreetEasy or Truly or Realtor.com, you name them, agents have gotten so used to getting a client, asking that client what they're looking for, going into the MLS and entering in the information and spitting them back results. Happens all the time. And clients are so conditioned to work in this way where they're actually getting negative value. I would equate this to be you want to go book a flight. So you're going to call a travel agent and ask them and say, I want to fly from point A to point B on these dates. What are my options? And then that travel agent spits you back the options, right? You can do that yourself in a myriad of digital ways. And you can do it yourself, obviously, through Zillow or any of the other portals. So the real estate agent needs to shift that conversation. There's actually been a resurgence in travel agents in the last couple of years. It's not that technology has decreased, rather, there's a way that the travel agencies are coming alongside from crafting these unique experiences, from being able to build on their relationships, from saving the client time and giving white glove service. So travel agencies have seen a resurgence because they're delivering a different product. So my argument is real estate agents can do the same thing. And in light of all of the noise of the commission lawsuits and everything else going on, it is our obligation right now to do better and to level up the standards of the industry. So what's one easy way for an agent to do it? When you first speak to a prospective buyer, don't ask them what they're looking for. My favorite question to start is, what made you reach out today? Or what got you thinking about, buying today? I want to know high level what's going on in the world that made them want to consider reaching out, because I first want to understand the intent. I don't care what they're looking for. I want to know why they're looking for, what's going on, what may have changed, what's their current situation. Only when I understand that can we together understand, okay, so you're looking for X, Y, and Z because of these reasons around this. Great. It sounds like this type of property will suit your needs. Does that align? Yes, great. Then we can together go into that process and explore what options are there. Because otherwise, if you don't go through that, then A, you're just a commodity. B, you don't actually know if what they're telling you is true. And not that the client will lie to you, but that the client may not fully understand exactly what they're looking for, or their priorities will shift during that time. And unless you come along from the origin top level with the client, then they're not going to position you, see you, view you, index you, whatever word you want to use, as someone that can help them universally with the real estate. They're going to see you as someone that was in this neighborhood or for that house or one of a dime of a dozen, right? If you come along for the holistic picture, it'll better position you to take ownership with them of that search and then move on from there.
Hmm. Great. And so I imagine the value that realtors can also offer is by really understanding their current market.
Correct.
I mean, you and your agents are in New York City.
That's correct.
Do you usually have a territory of the whole New York, all the boroughs, or do you even branch out beyond that? I know there's some dual agents that will do New Jersey and New York. Like, what do you usually see? And as far as your agents, and what do you think is the most valuable for an agent as far as offering some sort of expertise on different markets?
Yeah, so on the aggregate, there's not a one size fits all solution. And I've seen the gamut, right? I've seen agents that like to be generalists who can also be specialists. I've seen agents that have a very narrowed sort of niche. And there's not necessarily one right approach. Generally speaking, people with a niche are able to defend off competitors a little bit better because they have such hyper local, hyper specialized information. And if the niche is large enough, if they have enough business coming in and enough, domain expertise, then you can create a really good business in that niche. When I see newer agents starting out in the business, they're going to be a lot less selective in what areas they're working with because they simply just don't have enough business coming to them or enough consumer choice to say, okay, I want to focus here. So if you look at sort of a curve over how an agent may work over their tenure in the business, they may start being way more general. And then they may choose as their business develops and to have more connections to get more specific. It may also be dictated because they may be based in a certain community. They may be networking out of a school or some other sort of community group or country club or something like that. So that may also help to sort of hone their business. I do believe in general, though, that agents should be able to purport themselves as people that can facilitate a client's real estate goals and ambitions anywhere and make sure that their firm that they work with has a worldwide referral network so that they can help make sure they're connecting their clients with the best of the best wherever they may be looking.
And I'm guessing that your organization has a large reach.
We do, yes. So we're focused in New York City, the Hamptons, Connecticut, New Jersey, and South Florida. But we're also part of leading real estate companies of the world and are part of an incredible worldwide network of the best to make sure that we can set up our clients no matter where their dreams take them.
Okay. Yeah, because I'm in Richmond, Virginia. I was up in New Jersey for a very long time, and I've seen a lot of people from New York City, I mean, even like Brooklyn, different boroughs, come here to
Yeah.
Richmond, Virginia. And a lot of people are going to North Carolina as well. But I mean, it's a very transient city. So I'm sure there's constantly new people, people leaving. Has your organization thought about branching out even beyond those locations that you just listed?
We've considered it, and it's really all about trying to find the right opportunity that makes business sense. One interesting stat that you may find valuable, having lived in New York, the transient nature of it is so true. And if you look at the holistic housing stock in New York City, 70% of the housing stock is actually for rent. Only 30% of all the housing stock in the city is actually for sale. And that's broken down between condo co-ops and townhouses from there. But that's so unusual, right? In this country as a whole, the fact that the overwhelming majority of the housing stock in any city is rental is crazy. And that's why there's so many people that are coming in. We do have a lot of renters here, and they rent, buy, move to the suburbs. But some people love New York City and love to make it their home. And obviously, we have a ton of international and investor demand as well.
And are you from New York City? What is your background as far as living?
So I grew up an hour north of New York City in Westchester County, a town called Chappaqua, where the Clintons now reside. And I swore up and down, left and right, when I was going to school down in Virginia that I was not coming back to New York. I hated the cold. I hated the snow. I was going to go somewhere warm. It wasn't really much warmer, though, in Harrisonburg. Those mountains were tricky. A fair amount of snow, a lot of cold, and a lot of wind. And then nearing graduation, I had opportunities to go down south or out west, work for a developer, work for a REIT. And I don't know, I had a fear of sitting behind a desk and doing the same thing all day. I had, interned, as we talked about earlier, from a real estate perspective, found that I was pretty good at it and took the more entrepreneurial road. And my parents did get the last laugh when my wife and I bought a house 7 minutes from where I grew up. So we now live up in Bedford. And yeah, still sucking it out through the cold, snowy winters.
Well, I can appreciate the cold, snowy winters. We're down in Richmond. I think we've gotten like 2 inches of snow in the 4 years I've been here. So we actually really miss the snow.
Yeah.
But because New York City is such a wonderful hub for the creative and marketing industry, and so many creatives either stop by there or they go to LA for a portion of their career, can you offer some advice as far as being able to get a place to live, whether that's renting? And you also had mentioned that the market is not necessarily representative of markets outside of New York City. It doesn't follow the same trends. So, can you give some insight for people who are maybe looking to move to New York or who are looking to change their situation in New York City?
Yeah, so let's start high level. So Manhattan as a whole, from a borough perspective, moves a bit counter-cyclical to the national trends. Brooklyn more closely mirrors the national trends, but is on about an 8 to 12 month delay. So if we zoom out and we look at what's happening nationally, many markets through the South, down into Florida, through the Sun Belt, across Texas and into Arizona, have entered more of a buyer's market territory. What that means is we've seen supply or more sellers on the market than there are buyers. Conversely, though, in the Northeast, it is still fairly a seller's market. Supply remains pretty tight, demand remains fairly strong. So overall, you're seeing a lot of the markets that were hot during the early days of COVID are now cooling off, and those markets that were cool are now heating up, like I mentioned on the Northeast or even in California. And a lot of this has to do with population migration. When you had remote work, you were able to work from anywhere. So you saw a large growth of secondary or tertiary cities where people were able to move to for better weather, no snow, better quality of life, more affordable living. But as companies have been increasing their RTO or return to office mandates, living in those cities may no longer be possible. So you've seen less of a population flow to those areas, and some people that even bought second or third homes there may no longer have the need for them, which is why you're seeing, some of that sell. You also saw those cities that had a lot of appreciation attract more speculation, which again propelled that up. And that speculative, buyer then is now a seller today. Um, New York, though, has been this sort of steady eddy. We did see, the first 6 months after COVID, the market was very slow. Once people realized it wasn't a density issue, though, we had a lot of people taking advantage of the lower prices in New York. And we saw a very, very good 2021 into the first part of 2022. Then, when interest rates started rising, the New York market was in a volume trap and really slowed down from late 22 through really it didn't start picking up until right after the election last year. And New York City right now has been in a fundamentally normal market. It's not a buyer's market, it's not a seller's market, it's fundamentally balanced. Now, there's a lot more nuance there um, in that, but on the aggregate, it's fairly balanced. So it can be a really good time to invest. New York City also hasn't seen much appreciation since our previous price peak in 2016. Our prices have only gone up about 5 or 6% since the previous peak that we hit in 2016. So there's a good time to get in here, and there's some arbitrage between how other markets have had incredible price appreciation while New York hasn't. And speaking to the opportunity ahead, I think New York City and the surrounding suburbs stands to do decently, if not fairly well, in the face of a mild recession, because that could help shift, if the labor market weakens, more of the power back to the employer who has been so desperate to try to get people back to the office, that if that brings more people back to urban employment centers like New York, Chicago, LA, Miami, things like that, it can bring more demand back into New York City.
Interesting. So, any suggestions for people that are looking to move to New York as far as rental opportunities? What's the best way? Because I know it can be pretty crazy out there, like, having to make a quick decision, things going very fast. What are like the top, 3 to 5 tips for somebody coming to New York and wanting to find a place to live on a rental basis?
Yes. So New York City's rental market is like none other in the country. It is fast, it is competitive. We regularly have vacancy rates below 2%. Our prices have been increasing incredibly so. They're up about 8 to 9% over the last year. And part of that is because the city council here in New York City passed what's called the Fair Act, which very simply meant that a tenant doesn't have to pay the landlord's broker fee. To make a complicated thing fairly simple, because of the supply and demand and the low vacancy rates, many properties in New York City for years, the landlord basically was having the incoming tenant pay their broker fee. And the city council passed a rule that says, well, you can't do that anymore. So a tenant can still hire their own broker, but they wouldn't be responsible for paying a landlord's broker. And this has naturally just had rents go up because not only do you have the usual 3 to 4%, the rents have been going up every year anyway. You've now had landlords say, okay, well, if I have to now pay this, I'm just going to increase my rent 5 to 8% to make up for that fee. So couple things. One is have your paperwork ready before you start shopping for properties. So typically landlords need you to have your ID, letter of employment, last 2 months bank statements, tax returns, and recent pay stubs. So they want to be able to see that you earn at least 40 times the monthly rent. So for instance, a $3,000 a month property, you have to show that you make at least 120,000. If you don't, or you don't have great credit, you may need to use a guarantor. So make sure that you have all of that. So the first thing is get all the paperwork together. The second thing is make a list of your must-haves your nice to haves and the things that you can do without. If you get 60% of what you're looking for, you're doing well. In New York, a washer and dryer in unit is like the ultimate luxury and privilege. So be prepared. This is a city unlike any other when it comes to the housing stock. If you're not from New York, I highly recommend that you consider hiring a tenants broker. And I don't say that just because I am a broker, but it will help you understand and move through this market without getting taken advantage of. So be prepared, do your homework, and truly understand what you want in a property and understand your budget and be prepared that your budget may or may not be realistic. And find a couple of friends. A lot of people have roommates for many, many, many years in New York City just to be able to make it more affordable as they're getting their feet wet here.
And should everybody bring their car?
No, leave your car at home. Parking can be very, very, very expensive here. You'll be paying five, six, $700 a month for a parking spot in the city. Leave your car at home.
Yeah, public transportation in New York City is like no other as
Yes,
well.
yes. So,
Wonderful. So you mentioned that you got intrigued to get into real estate very early. You got your real estate license at 18. 15 years later, plus, you're
yeah.
still in real estate. What do you love about real estate?
So I love that real estate is tangible, right? When you look at an asset class, it's one of the few asset classes that you can live in. It's three-dimensional, right? I'm sitting in a piece of real estate right now. So it is both an investment and an experience. And we are so much in the experience economy where people want to be able to spend their money not necessarily on things, but on experiences. So real estate blends both, where you're buying an experience and you're buying an asset that is most likely going to appreciate, right? When we talk about buying or selling real estate, we're not selling the property, we're selling the lifestyle, we're selling the dream, we're selling what that piece of property enables you to be able to achieve, to do, or the life that you want to live. And that's what's most interesting to me is the fact that it's not just a number on a spreadsheet. It's a living, breathing, well, not living, not breathing, but you know what I mean. It is a material, transformative sort of thing that
Mhm.
you're able to put your own stamp on.
That's amazing. So, for all those who are in a job that they just have been in for a while, or they're just, the idea of leaving is just scary because you never know what you're going to get unless you're actually in it, right? Like
Right.
sometimes there's that saying that the grass isn't always greener on the other side. And so that saying itself could just keep somebody to stay in their status quo, stay in their same job, even if they're unhappy. I hear that there's tons of people right now who are afraid to leave their job because of economical turbulence or it being an uncertain time, which in reality, it's always an uncertain time. There's always uncertainties. So, what would you say to that person who just knows intuitively they want to make a move, but they're just afraid?
So I think you have to check in with yourself, right? And when you're in a job, there's a couple things. You can be compensated well, you can learn, or you can have opportunities to grow. If you're getting all of them, phenomenal, you're in a good place. If you're getting two of them, you're in a really good spot. If you're getting one of them, that's okay. If you're getting none of them, you should definitely look. If you're getting one of them, that's where you may want to be able to consider, okay, what is most important to me and things like that. So the first thing I would say is it's okay to explore. You're not committing by exploring, but you're opening yourself up. And you may realize through that process that, hey, the grass isn't greener, and that's okay. I think the most important thing is having that perspective. When I would recruit agents and they're happy where they are, one of the things I love to say is, great. I only like to talk to happy people. If you weren't happy, I don't want to talk to you. And then, we talk about how, look, conversations can never hurt. I'm not asking you to come over here. I'm asking for us to have a conversation. At the end of the day, worst case, we'll learn something from each other. We'll move on. And that's great. And we made a relationship. We made a connection. So conversations never hurt. It's important to have that perspective and be able to check in on yourself and understand, are my core needs being met or not? If they're not, then that could be good reason to say, okay, let me see if I can meet them then.
And that's a wonderful way to use the logical mind as well. And you mentioned the gut, so there's also an intuitive piece to this too. Anything that you want to say around that that you haven't already touched on?
Well, as an individual, I have, sort of minimized for much of my career the emotional piece, right? I've led arguably too much with logic, which is why it's actually an interesting experience for me having gone through this transition I have, um, to be able to check in with my emotional side and be able to be sort of reconnected with that and understand, okay, if I'm feeling this, there's a reason for it. Let me check in. So that was something that for whatever reason I had sort of suppressed in me for many, many years. And I don't know exactly why. I'm sure a shrink could help me figure that out. But I also understand now, and arguably I understood it in the moment too, but didn't do anything about it, that I had an unhealthy relationship with work because of how young I was when I came into that company, because of how much it predated in my life, it was actually an unhealthy amount wrapped up in my self identity where I couldn't separate the two. And it became sort of all consuming. And I'm not saying I'm not working now, I'm not saying I'm slacking, but I understand how you need to create a balance and how work should be additive and how work can create that different, again, uplifting versus draining, bucket. And when you have an unhealthy relationship with work, it becomes all consuming that again doesn't allow you to show up as well. So understand too, what is your relationship with work? To me now, I'm working arguably actually more than I did before, but it doesn't feel as strenuous, as stressful, or as draining because again, it's a better diet for me to be able to consume.
Is there anything else you'd like to tell our audience today?
Jump and build your wings on the way down, as a mentor of mine once said. If you understand the surrounding, if you're not jumping blind, that's okay. Remember, boring is what is going to set you apart and give you that longevity in whatever field. Doing the easy things really really well is going to set you up for success, and then if you're able to do some of the hard things well on top of that, that's a recipe for an incredible career then.
And to watch more videos of people going for their dreams, be sure to watch this video. You deserve to live a life you love. You can do it. I believe in you.